morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Amber Stinger, and I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Johnson County. The League is proud to be nonpartisan, neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties at any level of government. We work year-round at the state and local level to enact voting reforms that best increase turnout and help new communities participate in the process. Our goal is to create a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. Today, we have the honor of talking with the most important people overseeing our elections at the local level, and we are committed to supporting their efforts to make our goal of free, fair, and accessible elections a reality in all communities. Here's our plan for today. Most of the time will be spent in conversation with our guests. We'll take your questions throughout the program. After we talk with our election commissioners, we'll spend a few minutes learning about the Voter to Voter Network, a stunningly effective relational get out the vote effort led by Mainstream Coalition. We'll end the event with some important organizational announcements. To help the event run smoothly, we want to go over a few things. First, please use the chat box to ask questions. We've set the chat options so that only the panelists will see your questions and comments. Once the panel discussion begins, we recommend you watch the program in gallery view. You can switch the layout on your screen by clicking view in the top right corner and selecting gallery. Click on the chat icon in your controls at the bottom of your screen to get the chat box to appear. If you're using a tablet or phone, you may have to tap the more button to get the chat box option. The program, as well as the chat, are being recorded, and we'll post the video to our YouTube channel in the next few days. We've also enabled closed captioning. If you would like to use that, click on the CC icon in your menu. Now, I'm delighted to introduce Janet Milkovich, our moderator today. Janet is vice president of our league, and hopefully you already know Janet from the many other events that she's moderated for us during this past year. We're honored every time she agrees to moderate our programs because she does such a fabulous job. Janet recently retired after spending more than 20 years in the nonprofit sector, advocating for often overlooked communities. Since she and her husband returned to Kansas City a few years ago, she's become a super active member in the community, cultivating relationships inside and outside the league to bring change to our local government policies. So Janet, thank you. And now I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Amber. I appreciate your introduction. So I'm excited about today because we've had so many questions submitted to us about voting. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Fred Sherman, the Johnson County Election Commissioner, and Michael Abbott, the Wyandotte County Election Commissioner. Welcome, Fred. Welcome, Michael. We're so glad that you're here with us today. I'm glad you came back from our time earlier this morning. Thank you for that.
Good morning.
So thank you. Before accepting the job as election commissioner for Wyandotte County, Michael was the program coordinator of technology for the Wyandotte County election office. His responsibilities included all the hard stuff, I think, programming and implementation of poll pads, editing the election office websites, and conducting election worker training. While doing all of that, he was also being mentored for 18 months by his predecessor so that he could take over the reins of election commissioner. Michael, when we first spoke, you were 30 days into your job. A little time has passed now. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling a lot better. You know, the last time I talked to you, I was down 2 full-time employees, actually 3, I think.
Yeah,
and so now we've got a full-time staff, and the stress level is a lot lower now that I know that the full-time staff is there. Plus, like I mentioned, I've got an assistant commissioner who's been doing this for 28 years, so that definitely helps a lot.
Good. I'm glad to see that smile on your face this morning. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
And Fred brings to his appointment as election commissioner of Johnson County 25 years of experience working for both municipal and county governments. Again, in the hard stuff, finance, planning, and administration. He's also served the cities of Westwood, Gardner, Lawrence, Olathe, and Johnson County. And as the Deputy Election Security Commissioner for Johnson County, Fred was mentored by Election Commissioner, Hall of Famer Connie Schmidt. Fred, how are things going for you?
We're doing really well in Johnson County, and thank you. Good morning. I appreciate you being here today and hosting this meeting.
Good, thank you. So it should be noted that both election commissioners were appointed by the Kansas Secretary of State, Scott Schwab. Here in Kansas, the Secretary of State appoints the election commissioners for the 4 largest counties: Johnson County, Wyandotte County, Sedgwick, and Shawnee. For the 101 other counties, it's the city clerk who is elected by the voters in the county. So prior to today, League members and other interested parties submitted more questions than we've ever received for any of our programs. So I thank everybody here on the call for being so active. We've grouped these questions into topics. So to set the stage, a former Secretary of State claimed that there were all forms of election irregularities, voter fraud, and voter registration fraud in each of our 50 states. But today we're going to learn how our election commissioners safeguard Kansas voters. So we're so grateful for you both and grateful for this time. So our first topic will be about redistricting. In the Wyandotte County, the League of Women Voters of Johnson County and leagues around the state have prioritized redistricting as one of the most important issues of the next 10 years. These first questions pertain to the impact redistricting may have on the 2022 election. So either of you can answer, how will the Kansas redistricting process and timeline impact your responsibilities as election commissioners for the 2022 elections, both local and national?
Go ahead, Michael. You want to start?
Go ahead, Fred.
This is obviously going to be my first time at doing redistricting, but I've talked to Bruce Newby, who, has obviously been at the Wyandotte County Election Office for the past 17, 18 years, and I've heard a lot about it. I think it really comes down to the timeline of it, but there's a lot of stress to it. So if there's a lot of fighting back and forth through legislature and it gets to, pushed to the very end, it just puts a little more tension on us at the election office to, figure out all the mapping with our department and then get all the details figured out, but at the end of the day, it's, our job is they're going to tell us what those boundaries are going to be. We got to work with our local mapping department and just figure it out. So we'll see what happens, but I'm not too worried about it.
Great, that's reassuring. And Fred, what would you add?
So I concur completely. Really probably the most critical aspect of it from election administrators, really the timeline, the timing on when the decisions are made, because once those districts are set, it really starts kind of a domino or cascade effect of a number of things that takes place to implement the election process for the 2022 cycle. In addition, to be able to do redistricting in sub-political areas below that as well, whether it's done through city ward districts or those kind of things. It's a policy decision. The legislature is the one who's going to establish the process. Mm-hmm. And I was not in elections 10 years ago when it was done, but my understanding, it was kind of defaulted to put into the court system, and the final maps were not done until really literally hours before the filing deadline. And that caused a lot of havoc and confusion. And if it gets into the court process, the goals, whatever that goal is in terms of whether you believe or not, the courts are really limited. They're really looking only at population base. So hopefully the legislation will work through a good, timely process. Like any good legislation, it's a policy decision. There's going to be a lot of perspectives on it, but hopefully there's good debate, discussion, ultimately compromise, and the legislation with the governor can sign off on a bill that is for the betterment of Kansas as a whole. The stalemate and kind of dragging it out is really probably the most critical component in terms of the downfall to election administration.
Normally when we get the census numbers by April, I believe, and then we thought we were going to get the census numbers in July, and now it's in September. So the trickle-down effect of that is the legislatures usually holds hearings around the state so that people can come and say, what is their community of interest, what's important to them. But that's all pushed back. So I would think it's going to have some impact or some effect on your jobs as well.
Yeah, again, I think the timeline in terms of when the final maps are done is the most critical component. You know, right now, Johnson County has a lot of different jurisdictional boundaries. We're really almost a three-dimensional kind of quilt in terms of different jurisdictions. When you start overlaying municipal boundaries with school district boundaries, you throw in some of the water district, the drainage districts we have. So it is very complex right now in terms of where people are and kind of what they vote for already. So to some extent, you know, I think Johnson County voters are a little more immune to kind of having that quilt of jurisdictional powers. You know, there is still going to be kind of that rural to urban shift. That's already been pretty much conveyed in terms of the impact the new census numbers will have in the statewide of Kansas. And those voters in those jurisdictions also have, you know, very emotional concerns too about how they may be divided up or what counties or jurisdictions they're put with. So again, it's an emotional, kind of difficult policy decision that the legislation has to work through. And ultimately, we hope they can come to a good decision in a timely manner so that we don't get too close to that June 1st filing deadline, so that everyone has a good understanding of where those boundaries, those jurisdictions are. And again, the timeliness is probably the most critical factor in terms of election administration.
Thank you. One other question about that. Wyandotte and Johnson counties are currently, as you know, in the 3rd congressional district. And there's a lot of speculation that because of increased populations in Johnson County, the district boundaries are likely to change. If that were to take place, how would that impact your election work and voters being informed ahead of the 2022 election?
I'll take it. I think there's going to be a lot of things to it, right? So we're going to have to send out new voter registration cards. We'll have to look at polling locations. We might possibly have to change polling locations. Obviously, all of our maps, all of our internal documents at the election office will change, will need to be updated. There's just a lot of different, you know, policy shifts that we're going to have to look at. But yeah, I think, you know, polling locations are definitely going to be looked at. It really just depends on how big of the change is going to be. You know, is it going to be a countywide thing? Is it going to be, you know, it's just the unknown.
Right. Well, what are the best practices for informing voters of changes to their district boundaries? How does that work?
Well, that's going to be a difficult one because it's going to impact each voter, you know, separately, depending on what kind of the cascade or fountain or domino effect of them. Because basically voters don't move. You know, when they live in the house, they expect to have the same components of them. You know, the technology and some of the web-based tools that we have, the voter view lookup through the Secretary of State's office, where each individual can basically log in and look at their sample ballots. That's a very, very useful and powerful tool because it's very difficult for us to craft a custom message to each individual voter. And depending on where the jurisdictional boundaries are drawn, it may impact different voters in different ways. But ultimately, once those boundaries are set, and we start through the administration process, setting the ballots after the filing deadlines have been done, then individual voters will have the opportunity to look up and see what their specific ballot style and ballot measures are. So the technology, the web-based interface, those things are remarkable now in terms of being able to get to the custom level of providing that level of information. I know that not everyone is, you know, demographically is computer literate, but we're becoming more and more, even on Zoom today. So it is going to be kind of a constant level of messaging and mapping and information, but depending on where the jurisdictional boundaries get drawn and how they change, it may impact every voter in a different way.
Well, the league exists to ensure fair representation, meaning every American can freely cast a ballot. What can citizens do to advocate for a timely redistricting process that will allow you to enough time to be ready for the 2022 election?
You know, this is a question that I've been asked a couple of times, and I've actually talked to my mentor, Bruce Newby, about this. And, you know, I think just from what I've gathered, the voters should, you know, closely monitor developing redistricting plans and should engage with the Kansas legislature as much as they can and ask questions. You know, that's from what I'm gathering, that's, you know, their most powerful tool is just to follow and ask questions and engage with the Kansas legislature.
Good. So, and what can citizens do, last question on redistricting, to help avoid the impasse which required the court to intervene and draw our maps in 2012?
Well, I don't know if specifically if citizens could do it. And again, as Michael indicated, just keeping it in contact, communications, kind of lobbying and dialogue with the local legislative officials, the House and state representatives, ultimately the governor, because really in Kansas, that's where the maps are designed to be, you know, approved and established through that policy perspective. And it's a legislative process. And whether it's redistricting, whether it's elections administration issues, or whether it's any kind of policy issue that the legislation gets through it, we hope that there's good open dialogue. There is, you know, debate. There's a lot of perspectives on them. You know, ultimately, from a good government standpoint, ideally the legislators would come to compromise and kind of a consensus decision. And if they get into an impasse and then the timeline goes through it, that's the aspect of it. So there's going to be a lot of goals, a lot of individual goals and statewide goals, and sometimes those are competing goals in trying to find and craft good legislation. But ultimately, you know, it's everyone's desire that the legislation and ultimately the governor will sign off on a bill that's for the betterment of Kansas and try to find good compromise and coalitions in terms of establishing district boundaries for the betterment of Kansas.
Thank you. I hope you're right. Michael, we got a question on the chat just now. What about Wyandotte County citizens that don't have internet access? How will they be notified of changes?
I'm pretty sure in the past, in 2012 or 13, when they did this, they sent out voter registration cards to the voters that were impacted. So I believe they'll get something in the mail, is from my understanding.
Okay. And like, would is there a phone number that they could call if, or we have a designated hotline or a number for people to call if they need to find out?
So we have two different, obviously they can call the election office, but then we'll also have our mapping department. They'll be able to contact our mapping department as well. So,
Okay.
and that'll be something, we're going through a new website change as we speak. So that'll be something that could possibly be more interactive. I'm hoping, so there could be some changes there too, but yeah, the election office and our mapping department is going to be their main numbers.
Great, thank you. I got a note here that earlier I said the other 101 counties, I said was the city clerk that was elevated, and it's actually the county clerk. So I stand corrected. You two could have corrected me. I wouldn't have had my feelings hurt. So let's move on to voter accessibility and turnout. The mission of the League is to empower voters and to defend democracy. So we've read that operating hours have been reduced for advance voting. If that's true, can you tell us why? And how can the community effectively request an increase in voting hours?
So I'll talk about that a little bit. So we have early voting at the election office at least 1 week prior to the election. You know, during the big elections like the presidential election, like we had last year, we were open for 2 weeks. And when we have satellite locations in Wyandotte County, we at least have 2 satellite locations for each election. Those were also open for 2 weeks for the last year's election. But, you know, this year, that's only going to be for 2 Saturdays on those satellite locations, but still will be 1 full week at the election office. The reason we do that is it's different for each election and each year. Historically, these type of elections, you know, Wyandotte County, we're only getting around 15% turnout. So, you know, to have satellite location open for 2 weeks or even a week straight, you know, you got to look at, you know, is it cost effective? Is it wasting taxpayers' money to do that, especially when you're having a very low turnout? So it's just kind of an administrative decision that we have to look at based off past turnout.
Gotcha. And Michael, when you and I had spoken a couple months ago, you said one of the questions you'd really like to ask anybody on this call are why aren't we turning out for the local elections when they impact our daily lives? So to that end, can I put words in your mouth and say if the turnout increases, the election office will plan accordingly,
Absolutely.
respond accordingly?
Absolutely.
And Fred, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, very similar sentiment. You know, the thrust of the question, they said they read about reduced hours. And I think the voters, sometimes they get a little confused when they see events or election issues debated either in the national news based off of legislative actions in other states. And there is even some proposed legislation in Kansas that may have put some parameters on advanced voting hours and locations and numbers. Really, in Kansas, we have very good parameters. It's kind of done to the county election administrator level in terms of decisions. Some states have very specific parameters on when and how much and to what extent. That's not the case in Kansas. We can start advanced voting up to 20 days. Traditionally in Johnson County, on those even number years, the presidential years, the gubernatorial years, we've had 2 full weeks of advanced voting. But just like Michael indicated in Wyandotte County, this year, given the lower turnouts, it's only going to be a week of advanced voting in the local races. And again, that's just predicated on the fact of sheer numbers that, single digit number percentages are very low percent turnout. And so it's going to be difficult to basically staff the level we did in the presidential year. But there is no legislative actions to reduce hours in Kansas. There was, again, some debate and discussion at the legislative level that got some media coverage, and again, other states, but that's not the case in Kansas of limiting hours per se.
Thank you. So speaking of voter turnout, what areas of each county has low voter turnout? And what are your plans to engage those voters? And thirdly, how can the league help? And later on in our talk, we're going to really talk specifically about programs that the league does. But to you, what are your low areas?
So I not necessarily geographical area. You can kind of map it out, but it's probably more demographic. You know, as one goes through their life cycles, there are certain age groups that participate in voting activities greater than other levels of it. So, I think in the Johnson County level, we have fairly uniform voter participation if you map it out on a map geographically. But if you dig down more of a 3-dimensional component of it, looking at different demographic aspects of it, either by age or even some aspect in terms of aspects of the mobility aspects of it. That's really, I think, where you can enhance getting additional participation. I'm starting to look at the data primarily for the seniors, the people that live in assisted living facilities, nursing homes, those kind of things. That's one area that those people have a lot of limitations for mobility, where it's just not as easy for them to be able to go to a polling site on election day or go to an advanced site. So that's one avenue I'm starting to explore and look at the data at.
Mm-hmm. I've got to put something in here. One of the pieces of legislation that passed this session was about limiting the number of ballots a citizen could take on behalf of others. And I know with the league, especially when we go to senior citizen centers, some of the residents there need help. They need somebody to deliver their ballots. So that's something we're really looking at too, Fred. So thank you. Michael, for Wyandotte County, what areas are low
So I was
turnout?
just looking specifically at this last election that we had, and I noticed that, KC won with one of our warden precincts, had a 38% voter turnout. And then I looked at, 15 other warden precincts that had between 40 and 49% voter turnout. And that was kind of our lower for last year. I was looking kind of on the map to figure out where all these warden precincts are kind of be, and they're mostly the northeast part of Wyandotte County. So I don't know exactly why that is, but we try to do everything we can in Wyandotte County to get everybody to get out and vote. I mean, we send out an AB1 letter, which is an application to vote by mail. And then on the front of that letter, it talks about when election day starts, when early voting starts, where the early voting locations are at, times, dates. And we do that 1 month before advanced ballots start getting sent out. And then the week of early voting, we send out a postcard to every active household in Wyandotte County, and that postcard tells them the election date. It tells them exactly their polling location, the address. So we spend a lot of effort and resources trying to get that out to every active household in Wyandotte County. So I'm not sure why, the northeast area of Wyandotte County is not turning out as much as the other ones. I mean, I know it's different for each election as well, but I was just specifically looking at the last election, and definitely raises some questions.
So it sounds like your office is doing yeoman's work to inform the voters. So but perhaps there's a disconnect between receiving the information and acting on it. And one of the questions that came in was, are there polling locations that are convenient for those precincts that have low turnout?
Well, the northeast area would be closer to the election office. So, I mean, we got the election office right there. And then the two satellite locations really aren't too far from there. So I don't think that's the issue. So
Okay, thank
I'm
you.
not quite sure.
Okay. Well, I know that that's a personal mission of yours. You had stated to identify the problem and come up with solutions. So we look forward to hearing about that. Excuse me. We also, the league is planning voter registration events. Do you have any suggestions for where they should be held and who we should partner with within the counties?
It's a challenge keeping up with voter registration, at least here in Johnson County and in the metro areas. We have a very mobile population that moves around a lot, and particularly the younger generation. So that is a challenge to keep up with and active. I mean, I know my two children still, one of them's registered here, but even though he's in college and moves around a lot, but it's difficult to probably do it in a traditional standpoint in terms of finding and getting people registered to vote based off of a specific location, just given the mobility nature of particularly how they are. So it may take some untraditional methodologies. And then really, I hate to say it, when people move on their election office and having to register is usually one of the last things that they ever get to that level of them. People don't tell us when they move, unfortunately. So with some of the voter registration maintenance processes we go through. So it's really an ongoing, constant issue. It may be as much as trying to get down to the micro level of working with apartment complexes, senior living facilities, those kind of things to basically provide resources and education to people as they move into those facilities so they have the avenue versus the traditional sense of doing maybe state and county fairs and those kind of things.
Now, I have a friend who was a census worker, and she wasn't allowed to go into apartment complexes. So they had to rely on the manager up front to give them the information for the census. So that would probably be some kind of a hurdle for you to overcome
So establishing the dialogue and network with those management companies. Right now, we're going through a fairly extensive review of the specific addresses of every address in Johnson County, because it is very dependent upon when ballots are mailed out. And in those multi-unit complexes, if they don't have the proper address or unit number on them, sometimes the information is not getting delivered. So having a basic understanding in terms of, is it centralized? Does the apartment kind of do it in particularly a senior living facility or their individual mailboxes? So I think that is really going to be important going forward. It's establishing that dialogue, that communication, that network with those property owners, because they are, private property, those apartment complexes, those senior living facilities, and making sure they have the resources and information and understanding of how voting and voter registration can work. There is becoming a larger and larger number of housing units in our areas that are non-traditional. They're not a single family. More and more people are moving into apartments or mixed use type of developments. And it is important because you are registered to vote based off where you live. And if people are living in apartments or moving frequently, they need to update their voter registration to actively reflect their permanent residence.
Could I ask you, Fred, that jogged a memory when Josh mentioned something when we were in your office. If they have to have a picture ID, but they don't, does the picture ID have to have the current address when they go to vote?
So no, what we train our election workers with, and it's really, the question you asked is really kind of more specifics in terms of the driver's license. in terms of does that have to have the exact address they're onto it. So it needs to be a valid driver's license, but we train our poll workers when they come and someone votes on election day in person. They have a photo ID process to basically identify that voter. Does the ID resemble the person that's being presented into it? But then we verbally have them confirm their address. It's not the address on their ID, because they can use any state issued ID. It could be a community college photo ID. It could be, a different one. So it doesn't necessarily have to be their driver's license on them. But the verbal confirmation is where the poll worker verifies their voter registration aspect of it, in terms of where they're votified and where the voter identifies where they're registered to vote at.
Okay, thank you. And the signature they have to have a signature too. So there is still a check and balance there.
That's correct.
So Michael, for you, what kind of education, voter registration events do you have plans?
Well, I don't have any planned at the moment, but I think it starts with conversations like we're having here with groups like yours. I'm very open. That's one thing I want to be, is transparent. And if there's something that we can do at the election office to increase voter turnout, we will definitely try to do that. You were asking about planning voter registration events. The Wyandotte County Neighborhood Resource Center is a very good start. They're located on State Avenue in Wyandotte County, and they have a lot of resources. And if somebody's wanting to start, I think that's probably my recommendation to start there. But like I said, I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Could you type that link in the chat afterwards, or send it to me and we'll send it out to everybody?
Sure.
Thanks. And I interrupted you. Were you starting to say something else?
Oh, no, I was just saying that, you asked me if I had any events planned. I do not, but, I'm surely open to it.
Okay.
I think voter education is a very important topic. So.
You both had mentioned to me that you have the capability of going to high schools and taking Fred, was it you that told me that you took a voting machine for a high school election?
So the Johnson County Election Office, yes, has coordinated with some local school districts and high schools to conduct their elections in the past. That kind of put on hold in 2020. So I've not personally experienced it. With the pandemic situation, a lot of things got put on hold. But we have done an outreach program before to do student elections, actually utilizing actual voting equipment so that the students can vote for their people on a voting machine and go through the tabulation process. So that is an outreach program that has been done in the past. We need to resurrect it again as we come out of the transition area of the stay home and the pandemic era. But, again, back to what groups and events can be done, trying to get those younger voters, those high school age voters, enthusiastic and engaged into vote registering to vote and voting is going to be very important. And it can only be really done one student at a time, unfortunately.
And Michael, you said that's a possibility in Wyandotte too, I believe, to take voting machines to the schools.
Yeah, we've got my program coordinator, Kyla Shepard's actually working with a college group right now and a high school group. She just did a presentation via Zoom a couple weeks ago, and they were working on this, I think the beginning of last year, and then obviously the pandemic kind of hit, so it got put on pause. So I'll have to follow up with her to see exactly where they're at on that, but I know they're working together to try to do something similar.
Yeah. And that's wonderful for all the people that are listening today, that they could reach out to your offices and make a request. I'm not promising that you can say yes to everyone, but it's good to know that that's an option. So thank you for that. Currently, and Fred, you brought this up to me, there are a lot of election-centric conversations on the front burner, and there's a high level of distrust of the voting process. Do you think that the recent Arizona audit helped or hindered people's confidence in election integrity? And what are your plans to win back their trust? How's that for a hard question?
Yeah, that particular issue and one of the others nationally have obviously kept elections in the spotlight. So we are in basically fielding a lot of specific questions. So people are asking a lot of details, which overall is good. It's kind of creating a good exposure and detailed information in terms of how exactly election works. Because really, for the most part, people are very passive. They show up to vote. Within 15 minutes, they cast their ballots and they hope to basically get the results by 10 o'clock news and they're done. But what most people don't realize is just the gargantuan amount of efforts and processes and logic and accuracy testing and audit process. I mean, there is a mountain of work that's done for every election. And I think the awareness as people are kind of being exposed to the details, the nitty gritty, kind of on the weed issues as they ask these questions is good. It's not, I don't think everyone can understand and get a full breadth of knowledge just off of a 5-minute discussion. It takes years of knowledge to really understand all the nuances of it. So, in the grants aspect of it, if people walk away with a better understanding of the complexities, the checks and balances, the security, the integrity of the election process, yes, I think it is a good process in terms of the exposure and people's understanding of how just exactly elections work.
Thank you. Anything to add to that, Michael?
I agree. I mean, there can be a lot of confusion if you're reading the news and, but my whole thing is as long as we're transparent, makes it a little bit easier. But, I also encourage people who have questions or doubt to become board workers. I think that's the best way to educate yourself and be part of the process and help your community out. But, once you become a board worker and you're part of that process, then, I get a lot of people that say, man, I had so many doubts and questions until I became a board worker. We've got board workers that have been with us for 17, 18 years in Wyandotte County. And I mean, once they work and see the process and realize that these people that they're doubting are their neighbors, the people they go to church with, I mean, that changes their aspect. So that's one thing I would say is if you have doubts, ask as many questions as you can, but also try to become a board worker.
What is a board worker? Is that the same as a poll worker?
Yeah. So, we have many different jobs for them, but, whether it's working the polls or working at the election office, helping us with, warehouse work or whatever it may be, whatever area that they want to be in, we'll try to put them in, in that area. But I think that's a very good start. That would be my recommendation.
That's good advice. The league participated at the Johnson County election office with the mail-in ballots, and we were the deflappers and the, open things up and get them ready for the process. And we got to see how carefully everything was treated. So that was a good experience for us. So how does your office, A, prevent voter suppression, and B, deal with citizen concerns about it in Johnson County and Wyandotte County? That goes back to our former Secretary of State that talked a lot about things, the voting being problems in the voting area.
I think for us, it comes back again to what we're trying to do in Wyandotte County is as far as, sending out an AB1 letter that gives them every detail about the upcoming election, how they can vote, every possibility way of voting, plus having an application right there mailed to them for convenience, the postcard that gets sent to them the week of early voting. And then, we post on our website, we post on social media. So we're trying to touch every active voter in Wyandotte County. So we're proactively trying to do that. And, if there's other ways that we can do it, we'll definitely listen to those.
Do you think the additional, what do we call them, mailboxes? What were those things?
Drop
The
boxes.
Drop boxes and mail, the additional options for mail-in would increase voter, well, we saw that it did increase voter turnout in Johnson County for sure, right?
So 2020 was a little unique, and we had, probably a record number of people participate by mail-in ballots for the 2020 election cycle. In November, we had received just a little over 150,000 mail-in ballots total, which is about 3 times the number in quote a normal year. If you look at 2016 or 2018 numbers, those years were about 50,000 mail-in ballots that were processed here in Johnson County. So clearly with the stay-home pandemic issues that were kind of done, that maybe changed the trend a little bit. it's going to be interesting to see how the trend plays out in 2022 and beyond. Even though we had a worldwide pandemic, there was still a majority, more than half of people still voted in person, either in person advanced or on election day. So the mail ballots only represented about 40% of the total ballots submitted in Johnson County. So that tells me that the Johnson County voters are still kind of in tune to voting in person on the machines, even though there was gargantuan or once in a century issues in terms of facing them, that aspect of it. The other interesting component with the drop boxes, clearly back in October, November, there was a lot of discussion and dialogue in the national media about the integrity and timeliness of the U.S. postal system. So we did see a huge number of drop-off mail ballots put in the mail ballot that were put out in different locations of the county. In fact, it was about 74% of the ballots came back through those drop-in boxes. Fast forward a little bit to January 2021, and we had a Shawnee Mission School District mail ballot initiative, but only about 15% of those ballots came back in the drop boxes. The vast majority came through the U.S. postal system. So it's still going to be used through the postal system. That's still going to be one of the main avenues of bringing them back. But yes, voters did in droves use those drop-off boxes in November.
We can have another whole program about challenges with the postal system right now that we're reading about. But another question, are either of you aware of any voter fraud in your county?
Anytime we process the number of ballots we do, we have to work through individual issues in terms of specific ballots. One of the main things that happened, at least in November, was a lot of people who did not receive their mail ballot right away on the 20th day or the day that the advanced voting went to the polling sites to vote. And a lot of those voters ended up going home from advanced voting on that first Saturday only to see their mail ballot in their post office box. So I wouldn't call that fraud as much as it was kind of voter confusion in terms of how ballots are processed and those kind of things. Is there widespread voter fraud? No, there's not. We have a lot of checks and balances systems. We go through extensive logic and accuracy testing of all the machines. There's a post-election audit that's done in every county in Kansas that kind of verifies those electronic tabulation votes to basically an audited selected hand count process. So no, there is not voter fraud in a widespread measure in either county here in Kansas.
Do you concur, Michael, with Wyandotte?
Yeah, I do. Last year was very confusing to voters. I mean, there were so many different entities sending out advance by mail applications that it just really confused a lot of voters. And like, Fred said, we had the same thing where people were just really antsy to vote, that they applied for advance by mail and then just headed to the polls and then got their advance by mail and then, filled that one out too. So we had to go through all that, but there's no widespread voter fraud. And usually what we run into in Wyandotte County is a husband and wife will accidentally sign each other's ballot. That's usually what we run into, which is an easy fix. We'll call them and let them come down and correct it. But I haven't really seen, a whole lot of, fraud. There's just so many checks and balances that we go through.
So the Vote Anywhere law was passed in Kansas in 2019. Is 2023 still the target date for implementation? And why in the world is this taking so long?
Why does it take so long? And so the Vote Anywhere kind of vote centers aspect of it. In fact, the Secretary of State's office just in the past few months came out with the final guidelines or rules for how to establish that. And the first year it really can be implemented is the 2023 election cycle. One of the parameters is they do not want to implement that for the first time basis in a even number year, in a presidential year, or in a gubernatorial year. Why it seems to be very, convenient for the voters to be able to not have precinct-based locations. It creates a lot of very complex issues in the back end of the voting administration. In Johnson County, we have over 500 different precincts. So in some of those even year primary elections, we'll have over 1,500 different ballot styles or ballot permutations that a voter has to choose from in Johnson County. We traditionally had, in November, we had almost about 180 different polling locations. So to have data and guessing in terms of where I need to put printed ballots for what ballot style is a huge challenge, from implementing those vote centers. My staff and I have actually had some dialogue, and we've visited some other locations, other jurisdictions. We were down in Texas here recently during their municipal election process, and some of those counties have vote centers, and have had a really good dialogue with those election administrators and done some observations. But their advice is to be cautious, to not do hard right turns, make huge changes, because we want to make sure the election process goes smoothly and successfully. And even though it seems like a very simple change, it is a massive change in the back end to basically go through the process. And we lose all data. We know pretty much based off history of how many voters are going to show up on a polling precinct type aspect of it. And it may also change voter habits a little bit. One county I visited with down there that does vote centers, in November, they had 92% of their voters vote in advance. They had very small percentages actually vote in person on a day. So again, some of this is going to be just off of voter history and their preferences. You may see some movements towards vote centers in 2022 to try to get that movement going through. But based off the rules that's been put into place, establishment guidelines of the Secretary of State's office, the first real election we can implement that would be the 2023 election cycle.
Okay. And the Vote Anywhere law, would one of you like to give us a 30-second explanation what that is?
I don't know about the law. I was just going to talk about it real quick. I agree about everything Fred just said with the vote centers, because I get questions all the time. How come we're not doing it in Wyandotte County? And it is something that we're looking into, but there's so many details to make it happen. Wyandotte County has, voted basically leading paper ballot for years now, and be able to get all those paper ballots, like Fred said, at one location with all these different ballot styles, it is so complicated and complex. And to figure out how to get chain of custody on all those ballots from every one of those locations to and from, I mean, there is a lot of detail that's got to go into that to make that work.
So the summary of Vote Anywhere is right now in Kansas on election day, we are a precinct-based location for your polling location. You are assigned to go to a specific polling location on election days based off the precinct or where your residence is. In advanced voting, it is kind of almost a hybrid. It's almost like a Vote Anywhere type of thing, where on advanced voting you can go to it. But on election day, currently in Kansas, it's a precinct voting location. And the law would allow on a county option basis to, in essence, open it up so that any voter can go to any precinct. And again, I go back to right now on election day, back in this past year, we had almost 180 voting locations on election day. Multiply that times the number of ballot styles, it becomes a very complex system. And what happens is the fear, and one of the kind of the cautions is, will it reduce voting locations? Because it really goes from what I kind of consider to be your neighborhood hardware store model to more of like a Lowe's or Home Depot or Menards type model, to where you have larger centers. And, that again, that may be convenient, but some of the people, particularly in the rural areas of the county, or maybe in the Northeast, that have always voted in the location, we may not be able to get the connectivity or justify the needs to put the resources needed for a vote center until. So we got to be very cautious of if we really modify or change the number and location of polling locations just to do Vote Anywhere. And again, that's part of the reasons why it seems like it's taking forever, is we wanted, if it is to be done successfully, we want it to be done just like that, in a successful manner, not to have a major disruptions to people's ability to vote, secure the vote, chain of custody, making sure it's secure and accurate.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask one question that's Wyandotte County specific. And Michael, your county is more ethnically diverse than Johnson County. You've got 16%, as you know, of Hispanic, 28% Black. You have Asian and Native American in reasonable numbers, and 58% white. Do you have any plans to increase participation in communities of color?
So I think it all, again, starts with conversations like this, right? Having groups like yours get the word out, engaging us here, at the election office, to where we can start these conversations, figure out, what can we do to help, like I said, I just want to be as transparent as I can, as open as I can. And if there's something that I can do, whether it's come to a meeting and, do a presentation or bring my staff, I mean, we're all open to try to help.
Do you have materials in Spanish or other languages?
Yes, ma'am. We have, so throughout the county, I think there's 15 locations where you can go and get a voter registration application. And we at least drop off 25 Spanish and 25 English, at least at all those locations. One of the locations that we use it's called El Centro, and they really do a good job on helping the Spanish community get their applications filled out. We have, I just hired another full-time employee who is fully fluent in Spanish. So now we have two. So they really work together with El Centro and some of the other locations to help with that process. And then on early voting, we have a hotline number for the poll workers to call for Spanish to get a hold of one of those full-time workers. Same thing as on election day, there's a hotline that they can call. It's really been helpful to have one, but now we have two full-time, so I think it's going to help even more. But yeah, to answer your question, we send out at least 25 applications in both Spanish and English at all those locations.
Wonderful. And for non-English speakers, do they have translators at the polls?
So it depends, because, you know, I think there are some bilingual poll workers, but we don't have that at every poll, right? So if the way it works now, if there's somebody that needs help that speaks Spanish, they just call our hotline number, and we have that was one full-time staff, and now there's going to be two, but answering those calls in Spanish and helping them through it.
Okay.
But yes, if there is a Spanish speaking board worker, then we would try to put them in that area of the polling location. So we try to work it out.
My chat's blowing up with questions here, so I'm gonna skip a couple of questions and give us 5 more minutes on our prepared questions, and then we'll hit the chat if that's okay with you. So League members have a history of supporting our election commissioners in both Wyandotte and Johnson County. Let's talk about some of the challenges that you both have identified and some concrete steps we as League members and community members can take. So what do you each consider to be your biggest challenge at this time?
I think for me, just it's trying to stay ahead of the everyday change of elections. I mean, there's so many moving parts, and there's so many different things that are changing constantly. It's having a good team around you and constantly staying on top of everything that's evolving.
I think for me, that one of the biggest challenges, and it's probably going to be somewhat of the microscope issue nationwide, is going to be that voter registration maintenance list. Again, we have a very mobile population in Johnson County and the Kansas City area. The newer demographics and the younger age people are that aspect of it. And, you know, the voter registration process to some extent is a little archaic. You know, you live in one place and you register to vote, and a lot of the national laws, federal laws for list maintenance is based off the U.S. postal system. And the younger generation, they don't use mail. I admit I kind of got, you know, a pile of mail sitting on my kitchen counter that I go through a couple times a week. But, you know, these little things called the cell phone are probably, you know, the more trendy thing now. And from an election staff aspect of it, we're still very paper-based, and still very paper-based from a U.S. postal system as well, in terms of mailing out mail ballots or, you know, notifications to voters. So that's, in a long-term, more macro standpoint, is going to be a challenge, I think, not only to Johnson County, but just to elections in general moving forward in the next decade or so, is still the digital kind of technology aspects of it, and also just the list maintenance of voter registration, as people are very mobile in their daily lives.
I know the League is comprised of advocates, so once a message is clear on how we can communicate to the Postal Service on your behalf, let us know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to completely bash the postal system. They do a remarkable job. They have to deal with, if not billions or trillions of parcels of letters, you know, delivering to every specific location. And obviously we want, you know, it'd be nice if they were 1000% accurate, but they do get a lot of their tasks done efficiently under very immense conditions and budgeting standpoints and that aspect of them. So those postal people do remarkable jobs. But again, a lot of election processes are based off of U.S. postal system's delivery aspects of it. And that's not going to go away. We still print paper ballots. We still count paper ballots. and we still register people to vote based off where they live. And that's are going to be challenges moving forward in the digital era and just the mobility that people are living today.
You're a nice man, Fred. You're the defender of the underdog sometimes. Thank you. So is it a struggle to get enough trained poll workers? And would you consider going to 2 shifts on election day?
So let me answer that. We actually had a great wave of people volunteering to work in November. Back in August of 2020, we had barely enough election workers. And again, that was specifically right in the kind of the height of anxiety of the pandemic and the stay home or work order. We always will take more people to volunteer to be poll workers or election workers. As Michael indicated, if you're a doubter, you have some questions about the election process, that is the best way to kind of be able to hands-on get the information, get the training, and see how really all the nuts and bolts go together in terms of really as an extensive model in terms of doing voting aspects of them. I know the question comes up a lot of doing split shifts, and I think, and again, it seems like it makes sense on the surface of them, but when you get into basically administering and the security of them, the chain of command, ensuring who has access to rights, when you implement a split shift as poll workers, you enter in a lot of variables and concerns in terms of it's the same people open the polling sites, the ones that closed it, and those kind of things. So there are reasons and rationales why you would not do split shifts for election workers. Having the same crew that open the polling sites, sign off on them, everyone goes to the zero tape, administer and process voters throughout the day, and also close the machines is a very good reason why not to, in terms of a security standpoint of chain of custody, in terms of who all administered and was overseeing the use of those machines at a polling location. So while it may seem, kind of nice to split it up and humane from administering a secure election standpoint, there's a lot of reasons not to.
You have anything to add to that, Michael?
He basically said everything to the T. I mean, it's all about the chain of custody, right? Those same workers are opening the polls in the morning, signing the zero tapes, and closing the polls during the day, and have all watched the equipment. So once you get different people moving in and out, it's just the whole security thing. And as far as Wyandotte County, I think we have a little over 300 board workers as of today. So we don't struggle for board workers, but we're always open to taking more. But they want to work, and they want to work those long hours. I mean, believe it or not, they enjoy it. They look forward to coming and working those election days. So it hasn't been an issue for us.
3 cheers for the citizens of our counties, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
So I would like to go to our chat where we're up to 32 questions. So we're going to do this as best we can in the minutes we have left. Let's see.
Rapid fire time, isn't it?
Yeah, really. For both of us, because I got to read them before I even say them. How can people know if an election office has enough staff to do their work in a timely fashion for an election?
Well, I can answer that one. We never have enough staff, full-time staff, but every election office is dependent upon having volunteers or part-time people. My analogy is almost like looking at running like an NFL team or a Monday night football game. If you go to Arrowhead Stadium right now, it's going to seem very passive and quiet, but on game day or a Saturday night or Monday night, you've got parking, concessions, security, media. There's a lot of people. And it's very similar to elections where we depend upon a lot of volunteers or people that work part-time. We can always use more full-time. We're always under duress to have good training and onboarding. But, I've been very blessed here in Johnson County to have a good budget support. But every election is probably always struggling to get people, because it does take people and bodies to do a lot of the basics of administering an election.
Michael, your finance structure is a little bit different, right?
Yeah, I'm working with the unified government now to try to get another full-time position in our office, because Fred said, we could always use more full-time staff, right? But we really rely on our board workers to come in and help. So yeah, we'd always want more help, that's for sure. Especially a full-time staff or 2 would be great, but I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I'd like it to, but we'll still lean heavily on our board workers. We couldn't do it without them.
So when you talk about full-time staff and part-time staff, could it be full-time and part-time volunteer staff? Or are you talking
Sure.
about paid staff?
At least in full-time staff, at least through Johnson County, there's a pretty extensive onboarding and training, getting credentials, using, getting an email address, those kind of things. So when you're talking full-time staff, they go through and from a kind of a liability risk standpoint from the county, have an extensive amount of training and resources behind them. We still do rely on part-time individuals, seasonal people, just like an NFL game. You don't hire, concession people all full-time. You bring in people when you need them in the peak hours aspects of them. But the challenges we have is I've identified about 18 to 20 very specific election business operations, and all of them happen concurrently in the peak hours of elections. And I need to have enough full-time staff to basically oversee and manage each of those operations, because they're each very critical to having successful operations in terms of election done. But again, Johnson County has been very, very beneficial in terms of providing good resources to the election office. We're looking at our staffing levels and changing that model a little bit, but we will always rely on part-time seasonal employees.
Gotcha. How will either of the new election law bills passed? I know you didn't want me to ask this probably, by the 2021 legislature impact your work?
That one's a tough one just because there's a state lawsuit and a federal lawsuit going on right now. So we don't really know. I don't really know what's really going to be impacted. I don't have enough information to really speak on it with those two lawsuits now pending.
Yeah, a lot of the measures of those bills probably impact more at the Secretary of State level than they do the local administration of them. One of the issues that I think both Michael and I are facing right now is just logistics of what can be on the ballot envelope. We both have elections coming up here very soon, and the deadlines to print those envelopes, and some of the changes in one of the laws would address specific language that would need to be approved by the Secretary of State's office of what is on that return envelope. And it's just a decision that needs to be made. And unfortunately, with the lawsuits, it's put the state in kind of a weird quagmire situation of do they follow the law that's been passed, or do they have to appease to what the lawsuit parameters are doing? And so it's really as much of a timing issue in terms of sequence of events. And it comes down to what specific language needs to be printed on a ballot that here and coming up in less than 100 days, we got to start mailing ballots out. Shorter than that. And our deadlines are coming very, very soon, in a matter of weeks, in terms of our drop dead deadlines of actually getting enough ballots, envelopes printed and ready for the August election.
This may sound naive, but since you're both appointed by the Secretary of State, do you have meetings that he gives you updates on legislations that involve voting?
So there is a weekly conference call done by staff through the Secretary of State's office on elections, and they include every election administrator, every county clerk, the 4 county appointed election commissioners and staff. So there is a weekly conference call done to basically get everyone on board through the Secretary of State's office.
So in that case, do they discuss legislation with you?
I wouldn't say they discuss it as much as they give us updates of the current status of them, and also how it's going to be implemented if there is new changes in regulations. So again, the challenges at the Secretary of State's levels, they have 105 counties they have to administer over.
Right.
The big 4 here, at least in the Northeast, Wyandotte and Johnson County, we have staff and good resources. Some of those far out counties are really just one-man shops, and within those county clerks do a lot of things other than elections. In fact, some of the other state legislative changes, like Senate Bill 13, is putting remarkable pressures on those county clerks in terms of the new facets they have to do in terms of notification with the parameters of that bill. So I really sympathize with those county clerks, as they are really under the gun, not just under elections, but a number of things. And really, Mike and I have it easy compared to them. We basically only do the one thing, and we have staff, where a lot of those smaller county clerks are jacks of all trades, and they're having to do everything by themselves with very stringent, sometimes unreasonable deadlines.
Were either of you ever called to testify in front of the House or Senate about election issues this last session?
I was not.
Do you ever offer? I mean, the expertise rests with you. It seems like they'd want your opinion.
I think at least
I would be open to it.
Yeah, and I would be as well, but I also, I understand that the Johnson County has its own legislative platform and its own lobbyists and those kind of things. Really as an election administrator, we do that. We as much try to implement policy and administer the elections as opposed to try to influence policy.
Mhm.
The legislative is a process that is underway. And again, we were just talking
Mhm.
before, it's going to take debate, maybe compromise and coalitions, and hopefully they can come up with a consensus vote on it. But really our jobs as election administrators is to implement the policy, not establish the policy.
Thank you. I hope that didn't put you on the spot. Cat's out of the bag now though, huh? Because I asked, but given the likelihood of incoming federal funds to support community colleges, please speak to how your offices will promote college students' rights to vote so their voices could be heard. So Fred, you have a college student. This question probably resonates with you.
Exactly, and at that age demographic is always a challenge because they, have a lot of other interests, and sometimes registering to vote in a timely manner and showing up to the polls and voting is sometimes very low on their priority list. So it's going to be trying to engage to the administration, developing the outreach programs, the information and communication programs, really to that demographic profile. Again, not everyone goes to community college, and ones that do, they have different interests and parameters of them. So it's really providing a good consensus outreach and education program and materials, I think, is the best thing we can do.
I, with the league, participated in a voter registration at a community college, and it was really interesting to have conversations with these young people. Michael, did you have anything to add?
No, I agree with what Fred was saying, having open communication and like I said, one of my program coordinators is currently working with some of the colleges there, local colleges in Wyandotte County and some of the high schools. I think just keeping those dialogues open and programs open will be helpful.
Sounds good. So this goes back to the same day voting. And once all the kinks are worked out by 2023, would you as county election commissioners, do you have the authority to authorize it for your counties?
From my understanding, we would have to submit our written plan and guideline to the Secretary of State's office to make sure that it aligns with, the rules and regs that they have written. But then as long as it's approved by them, yes, I believe so.
And the other component of that is also it requires sign off of the county chairman as well. Again, there's a stakehold in terms of how it may or may not impact polling locations, number of locations, those kind of aspect of it. From a budgetary standpoint, one of the big issues we're going to be facing is that ballot on demand issue of being able to produce a paper ballot. And right now in our advanced sites, we have basically the printers to do that ballot on demand, but those printers cost $10,000 to $12,000 a piece. And if I'm looking at 150 polling locations, that's a pretty big expenditure to have to get into. So there's going to have to be buy-in and sign off at the county commission or county chairman level as well on that plan that's submitted to the Secretary of State's office. Again, it seems very simple, voter-friendly thing to do, but there's a lot of logistics and budgetary things that need to be thought through before it is fully implemented. I think everyone's starting to look at it and ask the questions, but right now we're just trying to figure out what questions and issues we need to even ask and look at, because we want a seamless transition if it does occur, so that it does not impact tabulation and when the results are done, and nor the security and the ability to do a good, secure election process.
And for Wyandotte County too, it on top of everything else, we're going to need more equipment as well. I mean, we're going to have to get on-demand printers. We're going to have to get, we only have 150 touchscreens right now. That's going to at least got to double. You're talking a huge expense just right there alone. Not to mention the security aspect of it. There's going to be a pretty big expense on top of it.
Well, this might be words you've been holding your breath to hear, but Commissioner Sherman, Commissioner Abbott, we thank you so much for playing the speed round of questions and answers with us. I feel so confident that our counties are in really good hands. I do appreciate your intention to be transparent, your willingness to answer difficult questions, and just to be here to dialogue with us. And please know that we league members are here to support you in your work, to get more voters to the poll, to make it a good experience for everybody. So all around the area here, we're giving you a round of applause and saying thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for what you do, and thank you for having us. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. So we'll let you go if you'd like to go, and I'm going to introduce a league member to talk about a voting registration opportunity. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Sure. So a big component of league work is education, and league members host voter registration events in high schools, colleges, senior centers, naturalization ceremonies. We have nonpartisan election information source called 411, Vote 411. And I want to introduce to you Spencer Smith, who is going to talk to us about voter to voter. Spencer is a new league member, and she is a pet food scientist with degrees from K-State. And she joined the league because she wants to guide people to resources that enable them to make their voices heard. Take it away, Spencer.
Hi, thank you so much, Janet, and thank you all for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about the voter network today, and specifically voter to voter. I think today is the perfect day to talk about that right after we talk to our county commissioners. So like Janet said, my name is Spencer Smith. I've been a member of the league since January of this year, and I recently joined our voter network team as our voter to voter team lead. And today I just want to give you a little more information about that. It's kind of been revamped a little this year, and we're really hoping to get a lot of people involved. So we know a lot of this already, but we know that a lot of our registered voters aren't getting out to vote every year, especially in these local elections. And the ones that do are typically of a similar demographic. We see a lot of older, whiter, and wealthier people voting, and we really want to expand who is turning out to vote every year. And that's what sparked the launch of the Voter Network back in 2018. And it's really designed to be an approachable and nonpartisan way to get information out to voters and help them find a source of truth and encourage them to turn out to vote, especially coming from their peers and not just from people that they don't know. We just talked about that. And so that's led to, we have the voternetwork.org, which has a lot of resources and programs available for people. Our Voter to Voter initiative, which is what I'm here to talk to you about today. And we also have kansasballot.org, which is a great resource to share with people who don't know a lot about who's on their ballot and what their issues are that they stand for. And Voter to Voter specifically is our biggest and most effective effort. This says it's peer pressure with a purpose, and it really is. It's about connecting with the people in your life, the people you talk to every day, and encouraging them to get out to vote. We know that traditional methods have only really increased voter turnout by about 1%. And what's nice about Voter to Voter is that it's coming from a friend, it's coming from someone you trust, it's coming from a reliable resource, and it's really you encouraging your friends and family to go out to vote. And so here's how it works. You sign up to be a voter ambassador, and you pick just a few friends, even if it's just one or two, and you help them every step along the way to vote in the next election by using our Voter to Voter online website. And you're going to continue to reach out to them throughout the process to make sure that they're registered, to help them make a voting plan. And we, as part of the Voter Network, help you do that along the way. We'll give you reminders and give you information to share with everyone within your own network. And then you're going to update your online tool and monitor your contact's progress throughout all of this. We currently have about 20 members who are signed up and actively using this, and we'd really like to double that number this year. So if you are interested in signing up for this, you're going to go to votertovoter.org. On the main page, you'll see a link right here that says join, and you can click on that. And it'll give you a whole list of teams that are available to join. You can search the League of Women's Voters of Johnson County, or you can just scroll through the list until you find it. But what I'm going to show you here is just a quick overview of what the website looks like now. I've heard the previous website was a little kind of clunky and hard to use, and it's very streamlined and easy to use. So here on your dashboard, you'll see just a general overview of kind of statistics of your whole contact list. So how you voted in previous elections. So calling myself out here, I voted in the general election, but I didn't vote in some of our local elections before that. And I think with our local elections coming up, that's so important. So you can really see who might need the extra encouragement to vote in our local elections. You'll see that there's also all these tasks that help you kind of to guide to see what information you should be sharing with your voters and when. It'll give you resources for what you should be sending to them. And it's very hands-off once you get your contacts in the system. So if you have any other questions about getting involved in Voter to Voter, you can go to the Voter to Voter website, and under the resources tab, there's an ambassador toolkit that might answer a lot of your questions. And you can also email me directly. My personal email is up here, and I believe Amber is going to share that with everyone in the meeting notes after this as well. But really, I'm available to help anyone throughout this. I think the technology is super easy to use. So if that's something that's intimidating to you, don't let that worry you. I'm here to help throughout the entire process. And I really hope we can get some more people involved in this initiative this year. So someone just asked, we're already a voter network ambassador with another group. Would you like to at least track that participation, if not with the League of Women's Voters of Johnson County? And yes, that'd be great if you could join our team as well. I'm not sure actually what the possibility is of joining multiple teams. I'll look in on that, but we would definitely love to track your participation if you're already using the Voter to Voter network tool. Yeah, Lindsay's a great resource for that too. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, thank you for letting me share with you today.
Well, thank you so much, Spencer. And thanks for stepping up to lead this group. It's so important. And we need people like you to help invigorate more members to take this kind of personal commitment to increase voter turnout. So, and I will include Spencer's email address in the follow-up email. I want to thank Spencer for the work she's doing. I want to thank Janet for once again leading this engaging conversation. I know there were so many other questions we didn't get to. Maybe we can follow up with additional articles in the newsletter to address some of those that we didn't have time for. And then again, we want to thank Commissioners Abbott and Commissioner Sherman for just taking the time on this beautiful Saturday morning to join us and help shed some light on some of these issues that we're so concerned about. So our hope for all of you who are attending, and there were almost 80 of us on the call today, is that you'll use what you learn to inform your conversations with your elected officials, your friends and family, and then you'll use that information when you're making decisions at the ballot box. Before we close, we want to make sure you know about another opportunity to learn and grow. Just a few days from now, I'll share my screen. We have a session about the legislative session of 2021. That's Thursday evening, June 10th. We have Sherman Smith, editor of the Kansas Reflector, Heather Owsley, the president of the Shawnee Mission School District Board, and Jackie Lightcap, co-president of our state league. And as you all may know, the league is part of one of the lawsuits challenging some of the reforms that the legislature passed this year. So we'll be able to find out more about that with Jackie on Thursday night too. So you can register for this event at our website, LWVJoCo.org. And as you can see, we work hard to put together engaging programs on important issues. Programs like these are only possible because of our members and their support. So if you would like to find out more about becoming a member, please contact us through our website, LWVJoCo.org, or email us at contactus@LWVJoCo.org, or maybe a friend is a league member and can share more information about our organization. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you all again soon.